Turn the music down right now. I'm not asking
There's
again.
no music playing in this house.
Don't do that. We got a complaint. I can cite you right now.
Then you're at the wrong address.
You don't get to tell me how to do my job.
Verify it before you threaten me.
I can come in and make sure the disturbance stops.
No, you cannot.
Officer Tyler McKenna walked up to a quiet house believing he was about to handle a simple late-night noise complaint. He treated it like a guaranteed win. Show up, pressure the homeowner, leave with compliance. He didn't know he was at the wrong address, and he definitely didn't know the man inside, Andre Whitaker, ran internal affairs for the same county. That combination mattered because McKenna didn't just arrive mistaken. He arrived aggressive. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. City, state, or country. And if you like stories where someone stays calm, documents everything, and forces accountability the right way, hit like and subscribe. These situations only change when people refuse to let them get brushed off. Now, rewind. It was a late night in May 2023 in a suburban county neighborhood with two streets that sounded almost identical, Oak Ridge Lane and Oak Ridge Drive. Dispatch received a noise complaint tied to 847 Oak Ridge Drive. The call got routed wrong, and McKenna was sent to 847 Oak Ridge Lane instead. One wrong word, one wrong house. Andre Whitaker was at home. No party, no music, no TV blasting. Nothing that matched the complaint. He was doing what most people do at that hour, trying to finish the day and get some sleep. McKenna pulled up already convinced he had a problem house. He didn't take time to verify the street name against the complaint details. He didn't slow down to confirm he was actually where the caller reported the noise. He walked straight to the door with the mindset that the person inside was about to get corrected. Whitaker answered calmly. He didn't act confused, because the situation wasn't confusing. It was obvious the officer had the wrong place. McKenna immediately brought up loud music and spoke as if it had already been confirmed. Whitaker responded the simplest way possible. Nothing was playing and the house was quiet. McKenna didn't accept that answer. He treated it like an excuse. Whitaker corrected him again and explained the address issue. He told McKenna he was on Oak Ridge Lane and the complaint address was Oak Ridge Drive. He asked him to double-check. That's where the interaction could have ended with a quick radio confirmation and an apology. McKenna chose the opposite. Instead of verifying, he escalated. He talked about writing a citation. He talked about arrest. He hinted he could come inside and make sure the noise stopped. None of that made sense because there was no noise to stop, and there was no legal basis for threatening entry when the officer hadn't confirmed the complaint location or even verified the situation. Whitaker stayed composed and focused on facts. He didn't argue about respect. He didn't throw his title around. He kept pointing back to what mattered: the wrong address, the lack of music, and the need to verify before making threats. McKenna's approach showed a bigger issue. He was acting like his authority replaced evidence. When Whitaker didn't get intimidated, McKenna pushed harder, like the goal wasn't solving a complaint, but forcing submission. Another detail made the moment worse. McKenna's body camera wasn't activated. Whitaker noticed. He'd spent his career reviewing incidents where body cameras accidentally weren't on during the exact moments accountability mattered. He didn't say it dramatically. He registered it the way an investigator does, as a problem that would matter later. The pressure continued for several minutes. McKenna kept insisting the complaint was valid. Whitaker kept insisting the facts didn't match. The conversation stayed controlled on Whitaker's side, but the threat was still real because officers don't need to be right to make your night dangerous. They only need to decide they're going to. The change came when McKenna finally realized who he was dealing with. It wasn't some magic flip. It was recognition. Something connected: the name, the tone, the confidence, the way Whitaker kept returning to policy and verification. Once McKenna understood Whitaker wasn't just any homeowner, the aggression dropped. The threat stopped. The posture softened. He ended the encounter and left without a citation, without an arrest, and without doing the one thing he should have done from the beginning: verify he was even at the correct address. Whitaker didn't let the situation fade into nothing happened. He treated it like a serious incident because it was one. He documented it right away while details were fresh. The address mix-up, the threats, the refusal to verify, and the body camera failure. He also made a decision before the night even fully passed. He was going to file a formal complaint. By morning, Whitaker wasn't debating whether it was worth it. He'd seen too many incidents die in the space between anger and action. He moved like someone who understood timelines, documentation, and how quickly a bad encounter gets rewritten once people start protecting themselves. He started with a clean account of what happened. Time of contact, wrong street name, the claim of loud music that didn't exist, the threats to cite, arrest, and enter, the fact that the body camera wasn't activated. He kept it factual because he knew emotional wording gives people excuses to dismiss it. Then he took the next step and filed a formal complaint through the department's process. No side conversations. No handle this quietly request. He wanted it logged the way policy required, because a logged complaint can be audited later. A casual complaint can disappear. The first response he got was exactly what you'd expect from a system that's used to minimizing these moments. Someone tried to frame it as a simple mix-up. Wrong address happens, they said. Late nights are stressful, they implied. Nothing really occurred since nobody got arrested. That argument is how patterns survive. If the only thing that counts is the worst-case outcome, then everything short of tragedy gets treated like background noise. Whitaker didn't argue. He tightened the record. He requested the dispatch information tied to the call. He requested the CAD entry. He requested the event number. He wanted to see what address dispatch actually had, what was typed, what was read over the radio, and what McKenna acknowledged. That's where truth starts separating from excuses. He also made sure the body camera issue was central, not a footnote. Officers don't get to choose when accountability applies. If a call is serious enough to threaten arrest and entry, it's serious enough for a camera, simple as that. A few days later, the conversation shifted inside the building. The word got around that the homeowner wasn't just some guy. People started realizing Whitaker could read a report and immediately spot what was missing. He could compare the narrative to policy in real time. He could ask for things most civilians don't even know exist. That changed how careful everyone suddenly wanted to be. Whitaker didn't lean on his title in public. He didn't need to. The system already knew what it meant. He also did something strategic. He contacted a civil rights attorney before the department could close ranks and declare the matter resolved. The attorney didn't treat it like a dramatic headline. They treated it like a case file. They asked the same questions a good investigator would ask, just with a legal lens. They focused on 4 points. McKenna went to the wrong address and didn't verify it. He claimed loud music with no objective confirmation. He escalated to threats of arrest and entry without a factual basis. He failed to activate his body camera. Those aren't just bad judgment calls, those are policy problems. Legal problems, too, depending on what the evidence shows. The attorney sent preservation requests right away. That meant dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS data, any neighbor call details, and anything else tied to that incident had to be retained. No accidental deletion later. No convenient gaps. Inside the department, the internal investigation started moving. Interviews got scheduled. Supervisors were asked what they reviewed that night and what they approved. McKenna was asked to explain why he didn't verify the street. He was asked why he escalated. He was asked why his camera wasn't on. That last question hit hard because it wasn't his first time getting asked it. As investigators dug, they didn't just look at this one call. They started looking sideways at his history. Prior complaints, prior write-ups, prior informal concerns that never became anything official. That's where departments either get honest or get exposed. Whitaker's complaint opened a door that had been kept shut for a long time. Records showed multiple complaints about McKenna being confrontational without cause. Stops that escalated fast. Residents describing the same pattern, Heavy confidence, light verification. Supervisors knowing he was a problem, but choosing the easy route. Because disciplining an aggressive officer creates paperwork and conflict, and ignoring it feels simpler until it explodes. This time, it didn't stay simple. The attorney made it clear Whitaker had two tracks running at once: internal accountability and civil liability. One didn't replace the other. If the department tried to bury it, the lawsuit would drag it into daylight. McKenna's defense started forming fast. He leaned on the usual claims. He said he acted on a complaint. He said he believed he was at the right address. He said the homeowner's attitude concerned him. He suggested the situation required firmness. It wasn't enough because the record was building around him. Dispatch logs would show the address. GPS would show where he went. Audio would show what he was told. The absence of Bodycam would sit there like a missing page from a book, right at the part that mattered. And Whitaker, of all people, knew how to keep pressure on the process without letting it turn into a personal feud. By the end of the first couple of weeks, the department couldn't treat it as miscommunication anymore. Too many pieces were being requested. Too many people were being interviewed. Too much of McKenna's history started matching the same shape. The county also noticed something else. If this became public, it wouldn't just be about one officer at one door. It would be about why repeated complaints were ignored until the wrong officer picked the wrong address and threatened the wrong homeowner. The internal investigation didn't start with a grand reveal. It started with routine checks that should have happened on night one. Investigators pulled the dispatch package. They listened to the call notes. They checked what address got entered and what address got transmitted. They matched it to the GPS data from McKenna's unit. They compared that to the complaint address. The conclusion was clean. McKenna went to 847 Oak Ridge Lane, while the complaint was for 847 Oak Ridge Drive. The mix-up didn't excuse what happened next because policy still required verification before escalation. Then came the part that made supervisors uncomfortable. McKenna's report didn't match reality. He wrote it like he had probable cause to act. He leaned on the idea that a complaint existed, so enforcement was justified. The problem was that a complaint isn't proof, and his own steps showed he didn't even confirm he was at the right location. Investigators also checked body camera logs. McKenna's camera wasn't activated during the interaction. There was no valid reason documented, no equipment failure reported, no supervisor note, nothing. That's a major policy violation on its own, but it also raised an obvious question. Why was he comfortable threatening arrest and entry while leaving the most important part of the encounter unrecorded? The investigators interviewed Whitaker. They interviewed McKenna. They interviewed the dispatch operator. They interviewed the supervising sergeant assigned that shift. They also spoke to neighbors nearby, not to chase gossip, but to confirm the simplest fact in this entire situation. There was no loud music at Whitaker's house. No one credible could back up McKenna's claim. The street wasn't describing a disturbance. The complaint didn't even belong to that address. The case was turning into a textbook example of what happens when an officer treats authority like a shortcut. At this point, the department had a choice. They could treat the incident like one bad call and hand out a light reprimand, or they could do what they rarely do, open the closet and look for what else was inside. They looked. McKenna had a history, not one dramatic incident that forced a headline. Something more common and honestly more dangerous in the long run. Repeated complaints that sounded similar and went nowhere. Residents had reported him being aggressive without clear cause. People described him escalating conversations quickly and using threats to control situations that didn't require force. Some complaints mentioned stops and contacts where he refused to explain the legal basis for what he was doing. Others mentioned intimidation, then no meaningful follow-up from the department. That pattern mattered because it explained why McKenna felt comfortable acting the way he did at Whitaker's door. He didn't act like someone afraid of consequences. He acted like someone used to them not existing. Supervisors got pulled into it next. Investigators asked what they knew about earlier complaints. They asked why nothing had changed. They asked what corrective actions had been taken. The answers weren't great. A lot of it came down to the usual mix: complaints labeled unfounded without serious review, informal counseling that never got tracked, and leadership treating community reports like noise instead of warning signals. Nobody wanted the extra work. Nobody wanted the conflict. Everyone wanted the problem to stay quiet. Whitaker's complaint didn't let it stay quiet. Meanwhile, the civil side started tightening too. Whitaker's attorney filed suit against McKenna and the county. It wasn't just about feelings or embarrassment. It centered on unlawful threats, misuse of authority, failure to follow policy, and the county's role in allowing a pattern to continue. The county's legal team tried the standard containment approach. They floated the idea that McKenna made a reasonable mistake. They suggested the interaction was brief. They implied no harm occurred since Whitaker wasn't arrested. Whitaker's response stayed consistent. The harm was the threat itself, delivered without facts, at the wrong address, with no camera, from an officer with a record that leadership kept ignoring. Then the investigation hit the part that usually triggers panic meetings. McKenna's conduct wasn't just unprofessional. Investigators found multiple policy violations. That combination pushed it out of the training issue category. It moved into discipline that couldn't be explained away. The county also had a reputational problem now. Internal affairs was involved. The complainant was the head of it, and the facts were straightforward. If they tried to bury it and it leaked later, it would look like the department only cared because the target had status. They were right to worry because people inside the department started talking, not the helpful kind of talking, the nervous kind. Some officers complained privately that Whitaker was making it a big deal. Others were more honest. They didn't like McKenna. They'd seen him do this kind of thing, and they knew leadership let it slide. The internal investigation wrapped with findings that didn't leave room for creative interpretation. McKenna violated policy repeatedly during a single, simple call. That result triggered the next phase. Administrative discipline was coming. The lawsuit was moving forward. The district attorney's office had enough to evaluate whether criminal charges applied, especially tied to misconduct and unlawful actions under color of authority. McKenna wasn't just facing a write-up anymore. He was facing consequences that could end his career. By the time the internal investigation finished, the county couldn't pretend this was a communication issue. Too many facts lined up the same way. Wrong address. No verification. Threats that didn't match the situation. Body camera not activated. A report that tried to justify the escalation after the fact. That's how it moved from an internal problem to a legal one. The district attorney's office reviewed the investigation file and the supporting records. They didn't need a complicated theory. The conduct was straightforward. McKenna used police authority to threaten enforcement actions without confirming he was even at the correct location, and he did it off camera when policy required recording. That isn't a small mistake. It's misuse of power. Criminal charges followed. McKenna tried to fight it like most officers do when the system finally turns toward them. He framed it as a stressful night. He leaned on the idea that officers need discretion. He pushed the narrative that he was responding to a community complaint and had to act quickly. The prosecution didn't chase emotions. They stayed on sequence and proof. They showed the complaint address and the address McKenna actually went to. They showed that he had multiple chances to verify and chose escalation instead. They highlighted the body camera failure and the lack of any valid explanation for it. They showed the policy requirements he violated and how those rules exist to prevent exactly this kind of conduct. He got convicted. That conviction did what internal discipline alone often fails to do. It removed the argument that this was just department politics. A court treated it as misconduct, not an internal disagreement. After conviction, his peace officer's certification didn't survive. He permanently lost it. No quiet lateral move to another agency. No reset in a neighboring county. The credentials were gone, and so was the career that depended on them. While the criminal case unfolded, Whitaker's civil case kept moving on its own track. The county knew what discovery would reveal if they dragged it out. The ignored complaints, the pattern, and the way leadership let it continue. They also knew what it would look like in public if they fought hard against the head of internal affairs after the facts were confirmed. A long trial wasn't going to help them. They settled. $300,000 to Whitaker. That number wasn't just compensation. It was the county paying for the gap between what policy said and what leadership allowed. McKenna created the incident, but the county created the environment where he believed he could operate like that. The settlement also came with pressure that money alone couldn't solve. The county had to adopt reforms that directly targeted the failures exposed by this call. Inside the department, the cultural effect was immediate. Officers who relied on intimidation started watching their steps. Supervisors realized ignoring complaints could come back on them with receipts. Internal affairs gained leverage to demand real follow-through because Whitaker's case showed what happens when leadership tries to smooth things over instead of fixing it. Whitaker didn't treat the outcome like a victory lap. He treated it like proof of concept. Calm beats chaos. Documentation beats denial. Process beats power trips. He handled the encounter the way people wish they could when they're put on the spot. He stayed steady, he kept it factual, and he made sure the system had something it couldn't dismiss. This story stuck because it wasn't about a dramatic rescue or a lucky break. It was about a common situation turning dangerous for no reason, and a person refusing to let it get normalized. If you're watching this and thinking about what you would have done, that's the point. Would you have argued? Would you have backed down just to end it? Would you have remembered the details the next day? Most people don't get taught how to protect themselves in these moments. Whitaker did 3 things that changed everything. He didn't escalate emotionally, he documented immediately, and he pushed it through the right channels with legal backup when the system started to minimize it. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do if an officer showed up at the wrong address and started threatening arrest anyway? Would you know what to say? Would you know what to document? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who needs reminders that accountability is real when you build the record. And if you want more stories like this, realistic, modern, and focused on how people actually win against abusive authority, subscribe.
Both of you IDs right now.
Officer, what's the legal reason for the demand?
I got a suspicious persons call, and you look suspicious.
We're eating breakfast. Who said we were doing anything wrong?
You don't need details. I said show ID.
No, we're asking you to explain.
Keep talking like that, and I can arrest both of you for obstruction.
Officer Tyler Bennett walked into Harper's Diner thinking he was about to run the easiest intimidation stop of his week. A vague call. 2 black men. A room full of people who wouldn't want trouble. He moved straight to their booth, demanded identification, and acted like refusing him was the same thing as committing a crime. What he didn't realize was that one of the men sitting there wasn't just another civilian. Judge Nathaniel Brooks held a federal bench and knew exactly what Bennett could and couldn't do. The moment Brooks started pressing him for legal basis, Bennett's whole approach became a mistake that couldn't be undone because a body camera was rolling and customers were already lifting their phones. Before we get into how this started, tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you like stories where power trips get exposed and people get held to the rules, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Harper's Diner was the kind of place that ran on routine, morning regulars, coffee refills that came before you asked. A few cops stopped in sometimes, not because anyone loved the police, but because small towns tended to treat uniforms like part of the scenery. That morning, Judge Nathaniel Brooks sat with Calvin Reed in a booth near the back. They weren't hiding. They weren't loud. They were eating breakfast and talking the way old friends talked. Low voices, relaxed posture. no attention-seeking. A call came over dispatch anyway. It wasn't tied to theft, violence, or any specific complaint about behavior. The report was vague enough to fit into a pattern that almost always meant the same thing. Someone saw two black men in a place they didn't expect and decided that discomfort counted as suspicion. Bennett arrived with that call in his head, and he entered the diner already committed to a conclusion. He didn't check in with staff. He didn't ask if anyone had caused an issue. He scanned the room once and locked onto Brooks and Calvin like the decision had been made before he opened the door. He walked up to their booth and demanded IDs. He didn't frame it as a request. He framed it as an order, like there was already a legal reason, and they were the ones stalling. Brooks didn't get dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He stayed seated, kept his hands visible, and asked Bennett what the legal basis was for the demand. The question sounded simple, but it landed hard, because it forced Bennett to explain what he hadn't bothered to establish. Bennett didn't answer the question cleanly. He leaned on the call. He treated the call itself like authority. He acted like the fact that someone had labeled them suspicious meant they now owed him compliance. Calvin watched Bennett closely. He had the look of someone who recognized the pattern and didn't want to give it fuel. His posture stayed controlled, but irritation sat right under the surface. Not panic, not fear. Frustration that this was happening in public over breakfast again. Bennett escalated quickly when he realized they weren't going to fold on the first command. He repeated the demand and started layering in pressure tactics. He suggested refusal would turn into a bigger problem. He hinted that they were making themselves look guilty. He added comments that weren't about safety or investigation and didn't belong in professional policing. He made it personal, and he made sure people nearby could hear it. That was the point. If he could embarrass them into compliance, he wouldn't need legal grounds. Brooks stayed calm and kept it procedural. He asked again what crime was being investigated and what specific facts supported a detention. He didn't talk like he was trying to win an argument. He talked like he was documenting a record in real time. Bennett responded by threatening arrest. He reached for the usual vague charges officers used when they wanted to punish someone for not submitting. He treated failure to identify like a universal rule, even though it didn't work that way. He talked about obstruction. He mentioned disorderly conduct, as if the act of sitting quietly and asking questions could become a disturbance just because he said so. Customers started paying attention. Forks slowed. Conversations dropped off. People didn't need legal training to recognize when an officer was pushing too hard with too little reason. Miguel Santos, the owner, noticed the shift and stepped out from behind the counter. He approached the booth with the calm urgency of someone trying to prevent his diner from turning into a scene. Miguel asked what was going on and why Bennett was demanding IDs from paying customers who were eating quietly. Bennett turned on him fast. He told Miguel to back off and implied that interfering would bring consequences. The tone carried a message that went beyond the moment. The badge outranked the business owner, and Bennett expected everyone to accept that. Miguel didn't take the bait. He didn't insult Bennett. He didn't get loud. He kept the focus on the facts. No one inside the diner had reported a crime. The men weren't causing a disturbance, and the officer didn't get to treat suspicion as a blank check. Bennett doubled down. He tried to control the room by controlling the narrative. He raised his voice slightly and used officer safety language as cover, even though Brooks and Calvin hadn't moved in a threatening way. He positioned himself like he wanted the camera angles, his body cam, the customers' phones, to show him in charge. That didn't work the way he expected, because the same cameras also captured what started this: a vague call, a targeted approach, and escalating threats without a clear legal foundation. More customers pulled out phones. Some recorded openly, Others held their devices lower. Either way, Bennett was surrounded by witnesses who weren't relying on memory anymore. Brooks noticed. Calvin noticed. Miguel noticed too. The power balance shifted the moment multiple recordings started. Bennett tried to force the old balance back into place. He demanded IDs again. He talked about taking them outside. He hinted that if they didn't comply, he'd make the situation worse for them. Brooks didn't match his aggression. He stayed composed and stayed specific. He made it clear he wasn't refusing because he had something to hide. He was refusing because Bennett hadn't articulated a lawful reason. That calmness irritated Bennett more than anger would have. Anger gives an officer an excuse to claim a threat. Calm, precise questioning takes that excuse away and leaves only the officer's decisions. Bennett slipped and revealed what was actually driving him. He made statements that had nothing to do with a specific investigation and everything to do with whether Brooks and Calvin belonged there. The moment wasn't subtle. It was the kind of talk that showed bias without needing interpretation. Brooks didn't argue about feelings. He moved the situation towards accountability. He identified himself. He gave his name and his position as a federal judge in a straightforward way, without showmanship. He didn't wave it like a weapon. He stated it like a fact that Bennett needed to understand immediately. Bennett's demeanor changed on the spot. His voice softened. His posture adjusted. He tried to shrink the moment down into something harmless, like he'd been doing a normal check, and it had simply reached its end. That attempt didn't land, because the escalation had already happened, and it had already been captured. Brooks didn't let him rewrite it. He requested a supervisor. He made it clear he wanted the incident documented and the recordings preserved. He didn't threaten Bennett personally. He didn't grandstand. He kept it about process and law. Calvin stayed steady beside him. He didn't jump into a speech. He didn't antagonize. His restraint mattered because it denied Bennett the chaos he could have used as cover. Miguel stood his ground too. He didn't apologize for defending his customers, and he didn't accept being treated like a suspect in his own business. By the time Bennett tried to step away, he wasn't controlling the scene anymore. He was trapped inside his own footage, surrounded by witnesses who had watched him escalate from a baseless demand to threats and intimidation. That was how breakfast at Harper's Diner turned into the beginning of a case. Judge Brooks didn't let the diner incident fade into a "we'll look into it" promise. He moved fast because he knew how this usually went when people waited. Memories got fuzzy, footage got overwritten, and the official report became the only story anyone was expected to believe. He started by locking down every source of video. Miguel confirmed Harper's Diner had security cameras that covered the dining area and entrance, and he agreed to export the entire time window around Bennett's arrival. Brooks made sure Miguel kept an extra copy as well. No single point of failure. Calvin focused on witnesses. He didn't try to recruit a crowd. He identified the customers closest to the booth, got names and numbers, and asked who was willing to give a written statement. Several agreed on the spot, especially the ones who had already recorded on their phones. They understood that a video clip alone didn't cover everything. Tone, threats, and the way Bennett tried to pressure people into handing over IDs needed context. Brooks also submitted formal requests immediately. He requested the Bodycam footage, the dispatch audio for the original call, and any reports Bennett filed connected to the incident. He didn't do it as a casual ask. He did it through the proper channels, with the expectation that the department would preserve evidence and document its handling. While all that was happening, the public side kicked off without anyone needing to coordinate it. Customers posted clips from their phones. Those videos traveled because they were straightforward. An officer entered on a vague, suspicious call, singled out two black men eating breakfast, demanded IDs without explaining a specific crime, then escalated into threats when they asked basic legal questions. People didn't share it because it was dramatic. They shared it because it looked familiar. By midday, Harper's Diner had strangers calling and messaging. Local pages were reposting. A few larger accounts picked it up and framed it for what it was: profiling dressed up as policing. The judge reveal added fuel, but the initial minutes were what did the real damage to Bennett, because they showed his intent before he realized who he was dealing with. The department released a short statement saying it was reviewing the situation. No details, no admission. The usual holding pattern. Brooks didn't respond with a social media war. He kept it procedural. His complaint laid out a clean timeline. Bennett's initial demand, the lack of a clear legal basis, the threats of arrest, the hostility toward Miguel, and the shift in Bennett's demeanor once Brooks identified himself. Calvan's statement backed it up from the perspective of the person sitting next to him, watching the escalation happen step by step. Miguel added his own complaint. He described the moment Bennett tried to intimidate him for speaking up as the owner. That mattered because it showed Bennett wasn't only targeting the men in the booth, he was also trying to silence anyone who interfered. Once Internal Affairs had those filings, they couldn't treat this like a simple misunderstanding between an officer and two diners. There were too many independent recordings, too many witnesses, and too clear a question at the center of it. What lawful reason did Bennett have to detain them and demand identification? The next stage was predictable. Bennett went on administrative leave. Leadership framed it as standard protocol, but everyone understood what it really meant. The city was trying to reduce the risk while they figured out whether they could defend him. That's when investigators pulled Bennett's record. Earlier complaints hadn't disappeared. They'd been filed, minimized, and closed without real consequences. The details varied, but the theme stayed consistent: racially biased stops, vague justifications, and a tendency to get aggressive when someone questioned him. Some complaints included people saying he threatened them with arrest for things that weren't crimes. Others described him demanding IDs in situations where there was no clear reason beyond, "I want to know who you are." The diner incident forced those older complaints into the light. When video shows the same tactics people have been reporting for years, the department loses the ability to call everyone confused or unreliable. Then the body cam footage surfaced publicly. It didn't help Bennett. It showed him walking in with a plan, not with questions. It captured his tone as he escalated from demand to threat. It also made one part impossible to explain away. Once he learned Brooks was a federal judge, he changed instantly. Softer voice, less bravado, a sudden push to end the encounter cleanly. That contrast told the real story. He wasn't just doing his job. He was doing what he thought he could get away with, until he realized the person in front of him had the power and credibility to make it stick. By the end of that week, the department's messaging shifted again. They stopped hinting at confusion. They started talking about policy adherence and community concerns. That language change was subtle, but it meant one thing. They knew Bennett was turning into a liability they couldn't carry. And Brooks and Calvin weren't backing off. They were preparing to take it past internal discipline and into civil court, where evidence matters more than excuses. Once the body cam footage circulated, the department stopped treating Bennett like a normal employee problem and started treating him like a lawsuit risk. You could see it in their behavior. Fewer casual statements, more lawyers in the room, more careful wording. Judge Brooks and Calvin Reed didn't let them drag it out. Their attorney sent a preservation notice to the city and the department, covering everything tied to Bennett and the diner call. Dispatch recordings, CAD notes, body cam metadata, radio traffic, patrol car GPS, prior complaint files, training records, supervisor reviews, discipline history, and any internal messages about the incident. That notice mattered because it cut off the most common escape route, claiming something wasn't saved. Miguel Santos added pressure from a different angle. He confirmed he would cooperate with any investigation and any civil case, and he gave a formal statement about being threatened in his own business. That expanded the story beyond two customers versus an officer. It turned into, An officer tried to intimidate an entire room. Internal Affairs finished their review faster than usual, not because the system suddenly became efficient, but because the evidence left almost no space to argue. Bennett had demanded IDs without a clear legal basis. He escalated when questioned. He used arrest threats to force compliance. He directed the same intimidation toward Miguel when Miguel spoke up. The recordings also showed how Bennett's tone changed once he realized Brooks had institutional power. Then the deeper review of Bennett's history landed like a brick. Investigators didn't just see a few isolated complaints. They saw repetition across years, stops initiated for vague reasons, complaints describing similar language, patterns in who was targeted, multiple occasions where supervisors closed concerns with soft corrective action and no sustained finding. That became a second scandal on top of the diner incident. The department had warnings and chose not to treat them like warnings. At that point, the department had two options: defend Bennett publicly and hope the public got tired, or cut him loose and try to contain the damage. They chose containment. Bennett was terminated. The department framed it as a policy and conduct failure tied to the diner incident, but the public understood what it really was. The videos forced their hand. Bennett didn't go quietly. He tried to justify himself through informal channels, claiming he was responding to a call and doing what he thought was appropriate. That defense didn't hold up because the call itself had been vague and biased, and his actions didn't match a legitimate investigation. The more he tried to explain, the worse it sounded. Then the civil rights lawsuit hit. Brooks and Calvin filed claims alleging racial discrimination, unlawful detention, and retaliation threats connected to their refusal to comply with an unlawful demand. They also targeted the department and city for failures in training, supervision, and discipline, arguing the department had earlier warning signs and didn't act. Miguel's role strengthened the case. He wasn't the target of the suspicious call, yet Bennett still threatened him when he defended customers. That supported the argument that Bennett wasn't acting out of safety concerns. He was using the badge to control people who didn't submit. The city's legal team tried to steer the case toward quiet resolution. They pushed for behind-the-scenes negotiation, hoping to avoid depositions that would force supervisors to explain why Bennett's earlier complaints were handled the way they were. Brooks understood the leverage. He didn't need a loud public campaign. The record spoke for itself. Multiple recordings, a body cam angle, security footage, witnesses who weren't connected to him, dispatch audio showing how weak the original call was, complaint history establishing a pattern. That's the kind of package that makes a city nervous, because a jury doesn't need complicated legal theory to understand it. The city settled. They paid a significant amount rather than gamble on trial, especially with a federal judge as a plaintiff and a mountain of video evidence already in the public conversation. Settlements don't always equal justice, but they do signal one thing: the city didn't believe it could win cleanly. The settlement terms also pushed change. The department tightened rules around ID demands and consensual contacts, requiring officers to clearly document the legal basis for detentions and discouraging fishing for identification without articulable reasons. Bodycam review expanded, not just when something went viral, but through routine auditing so patterns could be caught earlier. Complaint intake procedures changed, so repeat allegations weren't dismissed as unrelated noise. Bias training became mandatory, with clearer discipline for violations instead of vague coaching. The department also faced community consequences that money couldn't fix quickly. People didn't forget the first few minutes of that diner footage. They remembered an officer walking in confident he could treat two black men like suspects for existing in a booth. They remembered the threats. They remembered the tone shift the instant Brooks identified himself. That contrast damaged trust more than any single insult ever could, because it showed Bennett understood what he was doing and only got cautious when power sat across from him. For Brooks and Calvin, the outcome wasn't about feeling vindicated. They already knew what happened. It was about preventing the department from pretending it was a one-time mistake. The record forced the city to admit risk, forced the department to act, and warned other officers watching the fallout that this conduct could cost them their job. Miguel stayed open for business, but he didn't go back to pretending neutrality was safety. He made it clear Harper's Diner served everyone, and he backed that up with action when it mattered most. That's the lesson here. Power tries to win through speed and intimidation. Cam and documentation slow it down. Clear boundaries expose it. Cameras finish the job. If you were sitting in that booth, so what would you have done? Handed over the ID to end it, or asked the same question Brooks asked and made the officer explain himself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it. And subscribe for more stories where accountability actually shows up.
We need to ask a few questions and look at your business records right now.
Before anything, identify yourself clearly, name an agency, and tell me if you have a warrant.
It's just preliminary. It'll be quick if you cooperate.
Do you have a warrant or a court order, yes or no?
You're not in a position to refuse.
This is private property that I own.
The lead agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration walked into that Savannah bakery like he already had permission. He acted like the staff were going to fall in line, answer questions on the spot, and hand over records without slowing him down. He did not bring a warrant. He did not present a court order. He brought confidence, a badge, and the assumption that would be enough. That assumption collapsed when Dr. Alana Pierce stepped forward. She was not a frightened employee trying to keep her job. She owned the business and the building. She had built legitimate companies for years, and she understood exactly how government requests were supposed to work. The agent, Trent Callahan, treated the moment like a routine squeeze. Pierce treated it like a legal boundary. Right after this hook, quick question for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you like seeing people hold their ground and force accountability, hit like and subscribe. These situations only go one way when nobody pushes back. Now, here's how it started. It was March 2020, midday, Savannah, Georgia. The bakery was busy in the normal way. Customers waited near the counter. Staff moved between the register and the prep area. The space was open enough that most people could hear what was happening without trying. Two agents entered together. Callahan led. His partner stayed close, quiet, and watchful. They approached the counter and started pressing for what they described as preliminary questioning and access to business records. The request was framed like a simple step, as if it would be strange to hesitate. Pierce did not argue feelings or speculate about their reasons. She immediately focused on process. She required identification shown clearly, not a quick flash. Names, agency, and purpose needed to be visible. Then she asked the only question that mattered for what they were demanding, whether they had a warrant. When they did not produce one, she told them they were not getting records, and they were not questioning her staff inside her business. Callahan shifted tactics fast. He tried to make refusal sound suspicious. He leaned on authority instead of law. He implied that cooperation would make life easier and resistance would create problems. Pierce stayed calm and consistent. She repeated that the building was private property she owned, and that he had no legal right to take records or conduct questioning there without proper authorization. She also told him to leave. That was the moment the room changed. Customers started watching closely. Staff stopped moving as casually as they had been. Phones came out first discreetly and then openly. People were not filming for entertainment. They were filming because they could sense the agent was pushing past what sounded reasonable. Callahan noticed the cameras and did not like it. His posture tightened and his tone sharpened. He stopped trying to sound polite and started applying pressure more directly. He raised the threat level by using the language of obstruction, suggesting that Pierce was committing a crime by refusing to comply. That move was the turning point because it revealed what he was really doing. He was not following a lawful process and hitting a wall. He was trying to convert a lawful refusal into an excuse for control. Pierce did not give him the reaction he wanted. She did not yell. She did not insult him. She did not step aside. She held the same position. Show legal authority or leave. The steadiness made Callahan's escalation look worse, especially in front of witnesses. Then he escalated again. He moved closer in a way meant to intimidate and signal physical enforcement. His partner stayed in place, still quiet, still backing the posture. Staff and customers kept recording. In a packed bakery, everyone could see that the owner was simply asserting her rights in her own building, while a federal agent tried to force compliance without a warrant. Callahan began moving as if an arrest was the next step, even though Pierce had not attacked anyone or interfered with an investigation. She had refused warrantless access and demanded they leave private property. That is when Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker arrived. She did not walk in confused. She assessed quickly and took control. She separated the agents from Pierce and shut down the obstruction threat immediately. She ordered the agents to leave the bakery and made it clear the encounter had crossed a serious line. Callahan attempted to hold on to the situation, but the authority dynamic had changed. Once a supervisor publicly stops an agent mid-escalation, the attempt to force an arrest loses all cover. The agents left under Whitaker's direction. Pierce stayed composed through the exit. She did not chase them out or perform for the cameras. She focused on ending the unlawful pressure and keeping her staff safe. The bakery returned to normal movement, but the moment did not fade. Multiple people had recorded it from different angles, and the business had its own cameras as well. The evidence existed, and it was already spreading beyond the room. Footage from inside that bakery hit the internet the same day. Not because Pierce chased attention, but because there were too many witnesses and too many angles for it to stay private. People posted clips, others reposted them, and soon the story wasn't just agents visited a business. Viewers saw a federal agent pushing for questioning and records without a warrant, then threatening arrest when the owner refused. That detail made it spread faster. Most people don't know the fine points of search law, but they understand a basic line. Show legal authority if you want access to private records. The video made it obvious that the pressure came first and the paperwork came never. Comment sections filled with the same reactions. Some were angry and some were scared, a lot were personal. Business owners talked about agents showing up and acting like consent was mandatory. Former employees of different agencies weighed in about how often "just cooperate" got used as a shortcut around actual procedure. Local Savannah pages picked it up next. Then regional outlets. Then national coverage followed, because the clip was simple to understand and hard to defend. Inside the agency, the tone changed the moment the video started trending. Supervisors did not treat it like a minor misunderstanding. The footage showed the full sequence: the demand, the refusal, the threat, the attempted escalation, and the supervisor intervention. It also showed witnesses recording. That mattered because it eliminated the usual wiggle room where reports get written to make the scene sound cleaner than it looked. Whitaker's decision to pull the agents out immediately became the agency's first problem and its first protection at the same time. Her intervention protected the public and reduced harm in the moment, but it also signaled something else. Leadership recognized this as a serious violation right away. That meant they could not later pretend it was unclear. If a senior supervisor had to stop it in real time, it was already past the boundary. Reporters and activists began looking into Callahan within days. They found what Pierce's community already suspected. The bakery incident wasn't an isolated bad day. Complaints existed. Patterns existed. Prior claims involved aggressive tactics, warrantless or legally questionable searches, and confrontations that targeted Black citizens more often than coincidence could explain away. The public didn't need every document to understand the core contradiction. Callahan stayed in the field because his statistics looked productive. Arrests, seizures, cases closed. Leadership had rewarded outcomes while minimizing the cost of how those outcomes were produced. That trade-off became the real story. People started asking how many complaints were needed before someone like Callahan got pulled off the street. One complaint could be noise. Two could be conflict. A long string across years with similar allegations is a warning, yet the warning had been managed instead of addressed. Whitaker's name surfaced too, and the reaction split. Some praised her because she showed up, took control, and stopped it. Others asked why it took a public incident to trigger real action. That question didn't land on her alone. It landed on the full supervisory chain that had kept Callahan moving from one situation to the next. Pierce stayed disciplined during the media storm. She did not present herself as a victim begging for sympathy. She presented herself as a business owner defending a lawful boundary. Her focus stayed on what viewers could see. No warrant, no access, no intimidation allowed on private property. That calm approach did something important. It prevented the story from drifting into personality drama. It forced everyone to talk about policy, training, oversight, and accountability. Pressure mounted fast. Community leaders demanded answers. Business associations asked for clarity on what owners should do when agents appear without paperwork. Civil rights organizations highlighted the broader pattern. Good numbers can hide bad conduct for years if supervisors choose to look away. Within the agency, an internal review started moving with urgency. This was not the slow motion process people usually expect. Visibility changes everything. The recordings made it difficult to deny. The witness count made it difficult to rewrite. Public attention made it difficult to delay. Callahan's partner became a secondary focus. Viewers saw him standing there while Callahan escalated. He did not take the lead, but he also did not stop it. That difference mattered later when disciplined decisions came down. Meanwhile, Pierce started preparing for what accountability actually looks like when the cameras stop. She gathered her own evidence. Security footage, employee statements, business documentation showing ownership and control of the property. She also documented the impact on operations, staff stress, and reputational risk. Smart move. Civil rights cases don't win on vibes. They win on facts, timelines, and clean records. A civil rights attorney entered the picture soon after. This was not a lawyer looking for quick headlines. It was someone who understood federal litigation and knew how juries react to abuse of authority when it is clearly recorded. The strategy wasn't just to argue that Pierce felt mistreated. The strategy was to show a pattern, show intent, and show the agency's tolerance of that pattern. By the end of the first stretch of coverage, the agency faced two problems at the same time. One problem was Callahan's conduct in that bakery. The bigger problem was what the bakery incident revealed about the system around him. The agency moved quickly once it became clear the footage was not going away. Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker wrote the kind of incident summary that leaves no room for creative interpretation. Her report centered on what the public already saw. Two agents demanded access to records and attempted questioning inside a private business without a warrant, then escalated into threats when the owner asserted a basic constitutional boundary. That framing mattered because it forced the internal review to focus on legality and protocol instead of personality. Investigators pulled everything tied to that visit. They reviewed body-worn footage where it existed, camera footage from the bakery, and the phone videos posted online. They interviewed staff and customers. They collected ownership documentation that confirmed Pierce's control of the property. They also looked at what Callahan claimed he was doing there in the first place, because preliminary questioning without a warrant often hides a simple reality: fishing for something that can later be used to justify bigger action. Callahan tried to defend it as standard fieldwork. He pushed the idea that he was pursuing leads and expected cooperation. He framed Pierce as unhelpful, He leaned on the obstruction angle again, arguing that her refusal interfered with his job. That argument didn't hold up under review, because refusing warrantless access is not obstruction. It is the system working as designed. The moment he threatened arrest over that refusal, the situation stopped being a misunderstanding and became an abuse of authority problem. Whitaker's role also got examined, and she passed that test in a way that mattered. She arrived, assessed quickly, took command, removed the agents, and treated it as a serious violation immediately. The agency could not claim ignorance about the problem because a supervisor recognized it on site. Her intervention didn't excuse what happened before she arrived, but it did establish that leadership had a clear chance to stop harm in real time, and did it. Then the review expanded beyond that day. Once the bakery incident made Callahan's name public, complaints that had been sitting in the background became part of the record again. Internal affairs files, prior supervisory notes, and documented concerns from earlier encounters got pulled into the same timeline. The pattern was the same one the public was already talking about: aggressive approaches, questionable searches, repeated conflict with black citizens, and a tendency to treat consent like something he could demand. The most damaging point for the agency was not just that complaints existed. It was that the agency had options earlier and did not use them in a way that protected the public. You can counsel, you can retrain, you can restrict duties, you can pull someone from field operations, you can assign oversight. Someone made choices repeatedly that kept Callahan in situations where his approach produced predictable outcomes. That became the heart of the accountability conversation. Within weeks, Callahan lost his job. The termination was fast by federal standards because the case was clean. Clear conduct, clear video, clear supervisory intervention, and clear public pressure. Leadership could not drag it out quietly without making the agency look like it was protecting him again. Discipline hit the partner too, but it landed differently. He wasn't the one driving the confrontation, yet his presence mattered. He watched it happen and backed the posture without stopping it. Internal discipline reflected that difference in role, but the stain didn't wash off. Over time, he ended up leaving the agency. Pierce didn't treat those personnel moves as the finish line. She understood the basic problem. Termination handles one person. It does not address the system that tolerated the pattern long enough to let him walk into her business and try it again. So she filed a civil rights lawsuit. The complaint focused on unlawful pressure, abuse of authority, and the attempted use of arrest threats as leverage to obtain cooperation without legal process. Her legal team framed the case around constitutional violations and the practical damage caused when federal agents act as if warrants are optional. Discovery turned the case into a spotlight. Pierce's attorneys demanded the internal history connected to Callahan's conduct: prior complaints, internal communications, performance reviews, any documentation showing how leadership evaluated him and why he stayed in the field. The agency fought to limit what had to be produced because patterns are hard to defend once a jury sees them lined up in order. Pierce's side also prepared like professionals. Security footage was organized and preserved. Witnesses were identified early, not just staff, but customers, who recorded and remembered details. Business records were ready to show ownership and private property control. They also documented operational disruption, staff stress, and reputational consequences after the video spread. That matters in court because defendants love to minimize harm and call it a brief interaction. It was not brief for the people inside the bakery. It became a public event with real impact. As the trial date got closer, settlement discussions floated in and out. The agency had incentives to settle quietly. Pierce had incentives to push forward. She wasn't only seeking compensation. She wanted a verdict that said clearly that intimidation without legal authority is not law enforcement. That decision came with risk, because trials always do. Still, the recordings and witnesses shaped the case in a way defendants hate. Video shrinks the space for storytelling. It forces accountability to attach to behavior instead of excuses. By the time the case reached the courtroom calendar, the question wasn't whether the confrontation happened. The question was what the system was going to pay for allowing it to happen the way it did. Trial made everything sharper. In pretrial motions, the agency's attorneys tried narrowing what the jury would hear. They pushed to limit discussion of prior complaints and tried framing the bakery incident as a tense but isolated event. Pierce's side argued the opposite. The bakery incident only made sense when the jury understood why Callahan felt comfortable escalating without a warrant in a room full of witnesses. The judge allowed key parts of the record in. That shifted the whole case. Once jurors heard there had been earlier complaints with similar themes, the bakery footage stopped looking like a one-off mistake and started looking like the predictable result of tolerated behavior. Pierce testified with the same discipline she showed in the bakery. She laid out the sequence clearly. 2 agents arrived. They demanded immediate questioning and access to business records. No warrant appeared. She required credentials and lawful authority. Callahan escalated into obstruction language and moved toward an arrest, even though she stayed compliant and calm. She explained why she refused. She was protecting her staff and her business from a warrantless phishing attempt in her own building. Witnesses backed her up. Staff described how Callahan's tone shifted and how the threat level rose once Pierce did not give in. Customers confirmed the same thing from the other side of the room. Several videos in the bakery's security footage matched their accounts, and that consistency mattered because jurors don't like guessing. They like proof. Special Agent Supervisor Renee Whitaker also became a key piece of the story. Her arrival and decision to stop the agents in real time carried weight with the jury. It told them someone with authority saw the conduct and treated it as a problem immediately. That undercut any attempt to paint Pierce as difficult or uncooperative in a way that justified escalation. Callahan's defense tried the standard pivot. They argued he was doing his job, following leads, relying on experience, and dealing with someone who would not cooperate. They tried saying the obstruction language was a lawful warning. Pierce's attorneys kept dragging it back to one simple issue: legal process. No warrant, no authority to demand private records on the spot. No lawful basis to turn a refusal into an arrest threat. Then they added the point that hit hardest. Callahan didn't just ask. He pressured. He threatened. He tried to force compliance by manufacturing consequences. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a tactic. Closing arguments focused on punishment, not just repair. Pierce's team asked the jury to treat the case as a message about power. They argued that if an agent could walk into a business, demand records without paperwork, threaten arrest when refused, and face no serious consequences, then constitutional limits become optional in practice. They also pointed out the agency had warning signs long before this bakery and still kept him in the field. The jury came back with a verdict that made it clear they understood exactly what they were deciding. They awarded Dr. Alana Pierce $24.2 million in damages. The size of the award signaled more than compensation. It signaled punishment for abuse of authority and for a system that let the pattern continue until it became impossible to ignore. After the verdict, consequences kept rolling. Callahan was already gone, but the public now saw why he should have been removed earlier. The partner's discipline looked lighter by comparison, yet it still ended the same way over time. He left the agency. Supervisors faced internal heat too, because once a case becomes a national example, leadership cannot pretend the problem was invisible. Pierce did not treat the verdict like a personal trophy. She used it as leverage. Public testimony came first. She spoke about what happened in plain terms and kept her focus on business owners and workers who get pressured because agents expect compliance without paperwork. Then she helped build a legal support effort aimed at protecting other business owners facing unlawful searches and intimidation. It was practical help, not speeches. Guidance on what to ask, what to record, and how to document the encounter without escalating it. Community pressure followed that work. Local business groups pushed for clearer agency policies on contact with businesses. Civil rights groups used the case to argue for earlier intervention when complaint patterns appear. The public conversation shifted from, "This agent acted badly," to, "Why did the system keep putting him in position to act this way?" That's the part that stuck. This story did not end with one supervisor doing the right thing or one jury issuing a big number. The real critique was bigger and uglier. The system failed repeatedly by tolerating a documented pattern because the outcomes looked good on paper. The bakery incident only became the breaking point because it was filmed, witnessed, and impossible to spin. So here's the question people kept asking after the verdict. Why does accountability start after the 17th complaint in a viral video instead of after the first verified pattern? Drop your answer in the comments. What would you have done if federal agents came into your business demanding records without a warrant? Would you have stayed calm like Pierce did, or would the pressure have worked? If you want more real, grounded stories where power gets checked and accountability actually lands, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more.
Let me see your ID.
What's going on?
Just give me your ID.
Tell me what you really want.
What are you doing out here?
Waiting on the bus. That's it.
Turn around. I'm gonna pat you down.
For what?
Do what I said. Turn around.
All right.
Officer Evan Kessler walked up like he'd already decided what Malik Grant was doing. A black man near the curb outside a busy bus terminal in downtown Cleveland. And Kessler treated that alone like probable cause. He demanded identification immediately and didn't give a clear lawful reason for the demand. Malik didn't match the energy. He stayed calm, kept his movements controlled, and answered as little as possible because he was protecting an active federal surveillance assignment that couldn't be discussed in public. Right there, the power game started. Kessler wanted compliance first, an explanation later. Malik wanted clarity first, because clarity is what separates a lawful stop from a fishing trip. Before the moment goes further, tell me where you're watching from, city and state. And if you like stories where cameras and procedures expose the truth, hit like and subscribe, because this one turns into a hard lesson in accountability. Now, rewind to the beginning of that curbside moment and how it escalated. The terminal area was busy in the way downtown transit hubs always are. People rotated through constantly. Some were waiting for rides. Some were lining up for buses. Some were just passing through. That kind of environment makes it easy for an officer to claim suspicious without ever pointing to anything specific. And that's exactly where this went. Malik stood near the curb like someone waiting and watching timing. No arguing with anyone. No approaching strangers. No obvious exchange. He looked like a person blending into the normal flow of the terminal. Kessler approached quickly and opened with a demand for ID. He didn't start with a reason Malik could understand and evaluate. He didn't say Malik matched a description. He didn't reference a call for service. He didn't identify a specific behavior he believed was criminal. He simply acted like Malik owed him answers, because Kessler had decided he did. Malik handled it the way trained, careful people handle it when they know they're being pulled into something messy. He kept his voice steady and his body language neutral. He asked whether he was being detained. That question should have been routine. It wasn't. Kessler took it as defiance. He treated basic questions as difficulty, and the tone changed from questioning to control. He repeated the demand for ID with more pressure and started framing Malik's calmness as suspicious. The goal shifted from figuring out what was happening to forcing Malik to submit. A few steps away, a bystander named Janelle Park noticed the way the stop was going and raised her phone. She didn't provoke anything. She didn't step into Kessler's space. She recorded steadily from a safe distance and kept Malik and Kessler in frame. Other people noticed and lifted their phones too, because public stops outside a terminal don't stay private anymore. Kessler saw the phones. He didn't slow down. He moved closer, talked over Malik, and set up the next escalation by implying Malik was uncooperative. Malik stayed controlled and kept his answers minimal. He didn't explain what he was doing there because he couldn't. He wasn't going to expose a federal surveillance assignment in front of a crowd, especially one that was now filming. Kessler switched tactics and announced he was going to pat Malik down. He leaned on the usual officer safety language, without pointing to a specific threat. Malik didn't give him a reason to claim fear. He wasn't reaching into pockets. He wasn't making sudden moves. He wasn't clenching fists or taking an aggressive stance. He simply stood there and complied with positioning. The frisk happened in full view of the crowd and multiple phones. Malik stayed still. Kessler worked through the pat-down like he expected to find something because he had already built the story in his head. No weapon appeared. Nothing obvious showed up. That should have ended it. Instead, Kessler acted like the lack of a find was a new problem, not an answer. He started using stop resisting language, even though Malik's body stayed controlled and compliant. That phrase wasn't describing reality. It was shaping a narrative. Janelle's recording captured that mismatch clearly. Kessler saying one thing while Malik's posture showed another. With the crowd watching, Kessler made the choice to escalate again. He moved from frisk to handcuffs. Malik didn't fight. Malik didn't twist away. Malik didn't run. He stayed steady because he understood the stakes. If he reacted emotionally, it would give Kessler the exact justification he was trying to manufacture. Once the cuffs went on, Malik shifted the encounter away from Kessler and toward supervision. He still didn't disclose sensitive details to the crowd. He kept his voice contained and the information limited, but he said enough to force a higher-level response. He identified himself as a federal agent and demanded a supervisor verify credentials properly. That changed the situation instantly, not because Malik was trying to intimidate anyone, but because Kessler could no longer pretend this was a routine stop with a random civilian. A supervisor now had to step in, and the verification would either validate Kessler's actions or expose them in front of witnesses and cameras. Kessler had already committed to the wrong approach, and the evidence was already being recorded from multiple angles. Kessler kept Malik in cuffs like he'd won something. He stayed close, kept talking, and tried to control the crowd with his voice. It didn't work. People didn't move on. Phones stayed up. Janelle Park held her position and kept recording without getting in anyone's way. That steady angle mattered because it showed the full sequence instead of just the loudest moment. Malik didn't give Kessler anything to spin into a threat. His posture stayed neutral. His feet stayed planted. He didn't yank his arms. He didn't argue in circles. He focused on one outcome: get a supervisor here and get the verification done correctly. Kessler tried to keep the interaction at his level. He questioned Malik in the same pushy tone, still acting like Malik owed him explanations. Malik didn't start explaining the assignment, didn't name targets, didn't mention locations, didn't say anything that could compromise what he was doing. He kept it narrow and procedural, repeating that a supervisor needed to verify credentials properly. That's when Kessler made his next mistake. He treated the request for a supervisor like another challenge instead of a normal safeguard. He also kept leaning on the same resisting language, even though Malik's body stayed controlled on camera. You could see it in the crowd's reaction, too. People weren't just watching. They were tracking the mismatch between what Kessler said and what their eyes saw. Backup arrived first, another uniformed officer who took the scene at face value. That officer didn't slow anything down. He stood near Malik, watched Kessler, and followed Kessler's lead the way backups often do when they don't want to question their partner in public. It added pressure without adding clarity. Kessler looked more confident with another badge next to him. He started talking like the stop was already justified, like he didn't need to explain the beginning because he could narrate the middle. That's the trick. If you talk like something is already lawful, a lot of people assume it must be. Malik didn't. He kept the same calm tone, the same limited responses, and the same boundary. Supervisor, verification, and then end this. No public details. A few minutes later, Sergeant Colin Rivera showed up. He didn't come in loud. He didn't rush into Kessler's version of events. He looked at Malik in cuffs, looked at the crowd, looked at the phones, and immediately understood what kind of scene this was turning into. Rivera separated the problem before he separated the people. He pulled Kessler aside a few steps and told him to hold position. Rivera didn't do it to embarrass him. He did it to stop the momentum. Kessler had been driving the whole interaction, and Rivera needed the temperature to drop. Then Rivera walked over to Malik and spoke directly, in a controlled, professional way. He didn't demand a speech. He didn't make it a public interrogation. He kept it procedural. Malik gave the minimum necessary to trigger proper verification. He didn't announce anything to the crowd beyond what was required. He made it clear he had credentials and that they needed to be verified the correct way, through the right channels, not through curbside guessing. Rivera took that seriously. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't treat it as an insult. He treated it like a job requirement. Verification didn't happen the way Kessler wanted, which was the whole point. Rivera didn't ask Malik to explain his work in front of strangers. He didn't ask for sensitive details out loud. He stepped away and handled it through procedure, using secure contact methods and proper identification checks. He also kept Kessler away from the process, so there was no pressure and no contamination. While Rivera verified, the crowd stayed quiet but focused. People could tell the energy had shifted. This wasn't Kessler performing control anymore. This was supervision taking the wheel. Kessler, meanwhile, tried to stay composed, but the posture gave him away. He kept watching Rivera, watching Malik, and watching the phones. He couldn't control the narrative anymore, and he knew it. Rivera came back with a different face than Kessler expected. Not confused, not doubtful. Certain. He told Kessler clearly and directly that the credentials checked out and the cuffs had to come off. No debate, no extra lecture in front of everyone. Simple order. Kessler hesitated. That hesitation became its own moment because it showed the conflict wasn't about safety. It was about ego. The crowd saw it. Janelle's camera saw it. Malik saw it. Rivera repeated the order. Kessler removed the handcuffs in front of the crowd, and it happened with multiple phones locked on his hands. Rivera didn't let it be hidden behind a car door or turn into a private correction. It stayed public because the mistake was public. Malik rubbed his wrists once and didn't celebrate. No speeches, no yelling, no victory lap. He just looked at Rivera and kept it professional. Rivera addressed Malik briefly, keeping it controlled, and then shifted to Kessler. He didn't scream at him. He didn't act like a tough guy. He spoke like a supervisor who understood liability and understood standards. Then Rivera did one more thing that mattered. He separated Malik from the crowd and the officers and gave him space to reset without being surrounded. That protected Malik's safety and protected the integrity of whatever he had been working on. Kessler didn't get arrested. He didn't get slammed into a car. Real life doesn't work like that. What he got was worse for a cop like him. A public correction on multiple recordings, with his own behavior clearly documented from the first demand to the final removal of cuffs. And Malik left the terminal area with his assignment disrupted, his identity exposed more than it should have been, and the certainty that Kessler was going to write a report that didn't match what the cameras captured. Kessler didn't treat what happened as a mistake. He treated it like a story he could rewrite on paper. By the end of his shift, he wrote a report that tried to justify the stop from the beginning. He didn't frame it as walking up and demanding ID without a clear reason. He framed it like he observed suspicious behavior first, then made a reasonable decision to investigate, then lawfully detain Malik based on escalating concerns. That's the move. Start the report with certainty, and readers who weren't there might assume the certainty came from facts. The problem was that this time, the facts came with timestamps. Malik documented the operational disruption immediately, not emotionally, logistically. He described how the stop exposed him in public, pulled attention to his presence, delayed his timeline, and forced him to reveal credentials in a setting where he had no control over who was recording. That disruption mattered because it wasn't just embarrassment. It created measurable risk to an active surveillance assignment. Janelle Park uploaded her video that night, not with a dramatic caption, just a clean description of what she filmed. Other angles surfaced too, including a second bystander video that caught Kessler's first approach and the initial ID demand clearly. Then the body cam footage got pulled. That's where Kessler lost control completely, because Bodycam doesn't care about how a report is written. It cares about sequence. The timeline was simple. Kessler approached. Immediate ID demand. No clear lawful reasons stated. Malik asked whether he was detained. Kessler treated the question like a problem. The stop escalated from questions to frisk to cuffs. Stop resisting language appeared while Malik stayed controlled. Malik requested supervision and proper verification. Rivera arrived, separated parties, verified credentials correctly, and ordered cuffs removed in front of the crowd. No gaps, no mystery behavior in between. No hidden threat. No sudden move that forced Kessler's hand. When Internal Affairs compared the report to the footage, the inconsistencies weren't minor. The report described justification that didn't appear at the start of the video. The report implied resistance that the video didn't show. The report framed the detention as a response to Malik's conduct, while the footage showed Kessler escalating because Malik asked basic questions. That's when the investigation stopped being about a single curbside stop and turned into a credibility issue. Internal Affairs opened a formal case, not a coaching conversation. A real case with evidence review, interviews, and report integrity on the line. Then the city got outside legal pressure fast because Malik didn't handle this like a regular complainant. He had agency backing, documentation discipline, and a clear operational impact statement. An outside civil rights review got involved. That wasn't just for optics. It was because the evidence was clean, the crowd footage was public, and the report Bodycam mismatch raised a bigger question. If Kessler was willing to write around one video, how many other stops had he written around when there was no video? That review team requested Kessler's stop history. Not just arrests, stops, field interviews, Terry stops, ID demands, frisk frequency, complaint patterns, body cam activation patterns, report language patterns. And the pattern didn't look good. It wasn't one smoking gun. It was repetition. Stops clustered around the same areas. The same vague high crime framing. The same phrasing that turned normal behavior into suspicious indicators. The same escalation ladder where questions became non-compliance. The same stop resisting language showing up early in confrontations. A disproportionate number of black men stopped compared to other groups in similar contexts, based on the department's own records. Internal Affairs interviewed Kessler. He stuck to his report version. He described Malik's questions as evasive. He claimed Malik's posture made him fear a weapon. He emphasized officer safety and training. That didn't fix the problem. It made it worse, because it forced IA to make a choice. Accept the paper narrative or accept what the cameras showed. Cameras usually win when they're this clear. Rivera's role became important too. Supervisors don't just correct scenes, they create records. Rivera documented how verification was done, why it was done that way, and why the cuffs came off. Rivera didn't attack Kessler in writing. He simply described procedure and outcome. That created a second official account that aligned with the video, not with Kessler's report. By the time city attorneys reviewed the evidence, they weren't just looking at a bad stop. They were looking at exposure, bystander video plus body cam, public crowd, a federal agent on an active assignment, a report that didn't match reality, a supervisor who corrected the scene, a stop history pattern that suggested this wasn't rare behavior. That's not a case you explain away. That's a case you either fight and lose publicly or you settle and try to contain damage. And Kessler still had one last problem he couldn't talk his way out of: the words he used on scene. The early stop resisting language. The way he treated basic rights questions like disrespect. The way he escalated before he established a lawful reason. Janelle's footage made it easy for regular people to understand, and that's the most dangerous kind of evidence for a department. You didn't need a law degree to see what happened. All of it set up the final phase: discipline, civil payout negotiations, and policy fallout. Once internal affairs and the outside civil rights review had the footage lined up against Kessler's report, the city's options got limited fast. This wasn't a case where the facts were unclear. The sequence was clean. The recordings showed the first demand, the lack of a clear, lawful reason stated, the escalation when Malik asked basic detention questions, and the jump to cuffs with stop resisting language that didn't match Malik's controlled behavior. City attorneys don't like cases where a jury can understand the problem in the first 30 seconds. Malik's side didn't argue this like it was a personal insult. They argued it like an operational disruption with civil rights violations attached. They documented time loss, exposure risk, mission interruption, and the forced disclosure of credentials in public. They also pointed out something the public always notices. Kessler didn't slow down when cameras came out. He sped up. That detail matters in court. It suggests he wasn't confused. He was committed. The outside reviewers didn't just focus on this stop. They put Kessler's history next to it. Same types of locations, similar vague language in reports, similar escalation patterns, complaints that didn't go anywhere until there was video. Once the reviewers showed the city that the stop wasn't an isolated lapse, settlement talks stopped being hypothetical. The city settled for $4 million. That number wasn't only about Malik. It was also about risk management. The city was paying to avoid trial testimony, avoid long discovery, avoid public release of even more stop data, and avoid a courtroom replay of Bodycam footage next to a report that didn't match it. Then discipline hit. Kessler didn't get reassigned quietly. He got terminated. The report inconsistency played a huge role because departments can defend bad judgment more easily than they can defend writing a false narrative after the fact. Once a cop's credibility collapses, everything they touch becomes a problem. Arrests, testimony, past cases. A city doesn't keep that liability around unless it wants more lawsuits. The department also knew the public had recordings from multiple angles. It wasn't just Bodycam. It was Janelle Park's video, plus other bystanders, plus crowd audio reacting in real time. That made it impossible to frame the outcome as misunderstanding without looking dishonest. After the settlement and the termination, the department rolled out changes they could point to in public and enforce internally. They tightened reasonable suspicion documentation so officers couldn't skip the why and jump straight to demands. They expanded stop data audits so patterns like Kessler's didn't hide in plain sight for years. They also started stricter enforcement on Bodycam and report consistency, because the easiest way to poison trust is letting officers write reports that don't match what the cameras show. Those changes weren't magic. Policy never fixes everything. But it did one thing the system often avoids. It admitted that vague suspicion plus ego can turn a curbside interaction into a civil rights violation in minutes. In Malik, he didn't become a celebrity. He didn't go on a victory tour. He went back to work. He also left that scene with a clear outcome. He stayed calm, protected sensitive details in public, forced the situation into supervision, and let verification do the talking. He didn't win because he yelled louder. He won because he stayed precise, while Kessler got sloppy on camera. Now here's the question for you. If you were standing in that crowd, and you saw a calm person getting escalated on without a clear reason, Phones coming up, an officer getting louder, "Stop resisting," being said, while the person stayed controlled. What would you do? Would you record? Would you speak up? Would you keep your distance and still document? Drop it in the comments, because how bystanders move in moments like that changes outcomes. If you want more stories like this, realistic situations, clean timelines, and accountability that actually lands, like the video, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see how fast a routine stop can turn into a lawsuit when an officer skips the law.